That's how I feel about LinkedIn at the moment as well. Like, everyone's just trying to sell me something. It's driving me crazy.
I think every communication I get is at least sponsored or a bank who try to be human.
Oh, you have a podcast? Let me make you $20 million in the next 10 minutes. No thanks.
Why didn't you answer that ad? $20 million. I need that money. Hello and welcome to The Big Con, the podcast where we use the benefit of hindsight and the healthy dose of schadenfreude to look at where businesses took a misstep that had an impact on either their profit, their brand, or something much more dire. My name is Dale. I am a big old business nerd.
And I'm Emily, Harvard degree candidate.
Strategy is not just for the big players, so no matter what size business you work on, tune in as we learn through the failures of the poor souls that have gone before us. Emily, which poor souls are we looking at today?
Well, Dale, I have one today that feels a bit personal, as it was very important to me in my formative years. It was before Zuckerberg, before Spotify, before smartphones, and before Instagram influencers. There was
LG flip phones. Oh, yep, okay.
Myspace. I spent hours, and I mean hours, working on getting my profile just right, having my pictures all in the right spot. What color should it be? I basically learned how to code by doing this. Right? Does the music I have chosen play on my profile say what I want to say about me on there? Who are my top friends today? Jan can go because she didn't sit next to me at lunch. It was ruthless. And while it was very firmly in the zeitgeist of the early 2000s, it was absolutely annihilated and barely never to be heard of again. So what happened? How did Facebook get the one up on them? Why did we all decide to ditch it? We've shown that there's room for multiple social media sites in our world as we use Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, etc. So why did it fall from grace? And Dale, do you remember MySpace, and do you have any immediate thoughts before we dive in?
I was thinking about the top friends element the other day and just how that plays out in today's culture. It's viral crack. It is such a good way to share, because as soon as you see someone's top friends and you're in it, you want to also show your top friends, and it continues. It's an amazing way to spread the message, and countless other models have done similar. Fun fact, I had the opportunity to own the official NFT for Tom from MySpace's profile photo. So Tom was the creator of MySpace, and I had the opportunity to own that. Didn't take it up because it was far more expensive than I would willingly pay for anything like that. But yes, I remember MySpace. I remember it well. I think for me, it was about 2008 where the switch from MySpace was everything, and then it wasn't.
Let's have a little look at why that might be. It began in 2003 through founders Chris DeWolf and Tom Anderson. Yes, that Tom, the one that was in everyone's top friends. It seems a bit insecure to me, but sure. So it was
he baked in? Was he?
Yeah, he was baked in.
Good on him.
So it wasn't actually its own company to begin with. It was actually part of a marketing company, and they were basically just selling junk. And they looked to Friendster, which was one of the first big social media sites, which also disappeared. And it thought, let's make something exactly like that and put our ads for the stuff that we need to sell into that. But it is funny because over-advertising is what led to the downfall of Friendster. So, and it definitely contributed to MySpace. So this may be on MySpace for not seeing the writing on the wall. But we digress. For those listeners who do not fall into the millennial category and have no idea what we are talking about so far,
welcome.
Welcome.
Tell us your ways, Gen Z.
MySpace was a free service supported by advertising that allowed you to create your own web profile, express yourself and things you were interested in, and link to other people's profiles. Unlike Facebook or the profiles that we have today, it was highly customizable, as alluded to earlier with me picking and choosing all my colours. And they added new features constantly. And Lord help you, if you fell behind or were out of date on a new feature, it was social suicide. Oh, your profile doesn't have a song? That was released 2 weeks ago. You know what I mean?
Having just horrendous dance tracks from dodgy Melbourne DJs.
Absolutely.
Consistently. The more dodgy and obscure it was, the more out there you were.
100%. The cooler you were. So it was known to people to be a bit racier than other other places on the internet, as people were allowed to fully express themselves. So it was super hip. It also encouraged brands to promote themselves on the page. So many bands and musicians were actually discovered through there. So like people like Lily Allen, Sean Kingston and Arctic Monkeys were all discovered on MySpace. There was also a feature which is important to note as the story progresses, that members must be at least 13 years old and no one over 18 could view the profiles of anyone under 16. So that was to combat the ever-growing instance of online sexual predators having access to children.
Cool. So
we remember from our Ed Hardy episode that Ed Hardy was really a pioneer of like influencer marketing, and so was MySpace. And this was it was occurring around the same time as Ed Hardy. Apparently, what they did to build MySpace was they sought out really good-looking women on Friendster and then lured them over to MySpace. And this is basically what they built their business model on. The people want to look at hot people. And while disgusting, not far from the truth. So Sean Percival, who I've got a couple of great quotes from, he was vice president of online marketing. And he said about it, and this was a quote, "You were interested in what they were doing. You lusted after them because they were sexy. As the normal people, us, joined, we were just inundated with all these exciting people." And that really was what launched MySpace.
Fascinating. Creepy, but plays well to the human psychology.
Yes.
I don't disagree with the premise.
Yes. So at its peak, MySpace was attracting around 100 million monthly users, which is large, but not so much compared to what Facebook attracts these days. Although if you consider the time period MySpace was in, so this was prior to growth in internationalization, and also there were no smartphones. So you couldn't...
It was pre-iPhone, wasn't it?
Yeah, so you couldn't just log into your MySpace from wherever you were. You had to be at a computer. So that's pretty damn impressive.
Yeah.
MySpace was bought. Dale, do you know who bought them, or do you care to hazard a guess about what type of business or tycoon might want to buy this kind of advertising goldmine?
This may be an unfair guess, but the back of my mind says someone from Napster.
No, but lol.
It's like Justin Timberlake. For some reason, Justin Timberlake and Napster are in my head, and I don't know whether that's because Justin Timberlake played the bloke in The Social Network. Go on, fill me in.
When I tell you who it is, you'll be like, obviously. It was the Murdochs. So it was purchased by News Corp in 2005.
I did know that, yeah.
Yeah. So then by 2008...
I didn't know it was that early. Wow.
Yeah. And by 2008, Facebook had taken over as the top social site. So what happened? Why did the users leave?
Evidence would suggest the Murdochs happened, but
yes.
I think there's something else to play.
They're definitely part of it. It's that age-old tale where a big conglomerate purchases a tech business that needs to be innovative and stay ahead of the ever-changing market consistently, and it can't because it has to go through the slow, bureaucratic processes of a massive business.
I was reading this morning about Vice being cancelled and how they got investment money from Murdochs just because they're like, oh, well, we want that audience. We've got the millennial audience. I can imagine why it's appealing to the Murdochs and why they may have struggled to do anything with it.
And also, not only that, but they may have had more money than sense by the time News Corp sort of purchased it. MySpace spent millions of dollars in offices around the world for a global presence, for a purpose that is unclear given the fact that it's a virtual business.
It's a digital company, yeah.
And they spent more hundreds of millions of dollars building its own content delivery network, which is basically just the fancy name for servers. Whereas they could have just used Amazon or another company that had sort of more expertise in that field. This was a thing that they did not do well. It just had plain old bad UI and tech. People were complaining with how hard it was to use for not much of a payoff. It was made by marketing creatives, not techies. And they were competing with Facebook, Google, and other rising tech companies for talent. So, hiring was difficult because people don't want to work for the business that isn't tech-focused and growth-focused. So our marketing guy, Percival, also said that they were just trying to do and be everything. All the features at once. The sitemap was outrageously wild and not at all followable. It was just, chaos. So they were looking to do everything and the kitchen sink, which, as we know, dilutes focus. And they didn't outsource either. So Facebook grew really quickly because they allowed a bunch of third-party apps to build upon their foundation.
Is the whole premise.
Yes.
It was all the apps and the fact that a lot of businesses are built on top of Facebook versus MySpace really wanted to control everything.
Yes, they wanted to keep everything in-house, even though they weren't a tech company. It's not even their strength. Like, if they were a tech company and they were developing constantly, it might make more sense to be so protective of the features, but it just didn't make any sense. They tried to buy Spotify at one time as well, which was interesting.
Interesting.
Because the music thing sort of had always been like a point of difference for MySpace.
Yeah.
But
It's almost like a vertical that they were confident in.
Yes. But Spotify recognized they didn't need to be bought and probably didn't want to be bought by MySpace. So, like, excellent choice for the founders, because Spotify may have ended up in the bin.
Or owned by News Corp.
Exactly. Speaking of, in 2006, Murdoch sold $900 million worth of advertising space to Google over 3 years that had it was dependent on site traffic.
Which makes sense. So they've just bought a company. They want to see it to be profitable. They spent $680 million, I've got here.
Yeah.
$600 million roughly in 2005, and they want to get a return. And so ad dollars is the way to do it, which is common for digital companies at the time.
100%. One of the founders, DeWolf, so not Tom, said that after this deal, they doubled the number of ads on their site.
Whoa.
So basically the whole thing was just an eyesore and kind of looked like a porno site. Which
How do you know about that?
Huh?
How do you know about those, Sam?
We got a freaking theme on this on the last two episodes. I feel like we always have like a theme in between episodes by accident. Porn is it.
Hashtag porn.
Hashtag porn. So, but it actually was getting to look more like a porno site in its content as well. There were heaps of sexualized profiles popping up from sort of wannabe celebrities. And the Department of Justice was on their case because of a lot of incidents involving pedophiles, which, you know, the restrictions that we talked about earlier seemed sort of a bit lame against. Like, yes, I am 13.
I remember ticking that box as a 12-year-old.
Aside from all that, all the cool people that had brought people onto MySpace in the first place had left. So then no one wanted to be there. All of a sudden, it was very uncool. Also, they really tried to lean into the band thing, but then people said, like, every time they went onto MySpace, they were just accosted by bands wanting people to buy their music. That's how I feel about LinkedIn at the moment as well. Like, everyone's just trying to sell me something. It's driving me crazy.
I think every communication I get is at least sponsored or a bank who try to be human.
Oh, you have a podcast? Let me make you $20 million in the next 10 minutes. No thanks.
Why didn't you answer that ad? $20 million. I need that money. I want to go back to, I remember at the time we're talking about Facebook, and I might be jumping ahead, and Facebook was seeming a bit more of an adult platform, and everyone was still very baked into the MySpace area. Obviously, I'm probably jumping ahead and spoiling a story. Doesn't end well for MySpace, but I remember going back to MySpace and I feel like they just doubled down on only their band platform.
Yes.
And so all the platform customization disappeared, and it was just about bands. It felt like they were clutching on to, and maybe learnt less too late around what they were actually meant to be. So it's funny you mentioned they tried to go back to their core tenant.
They tried, but a little too late because everyone had left, and there's a rule called Reed's Law that says that a way of communicating is great, but only if everyone adapts it. For example, when the phone was first invented, it was this amazing new technology, but no one else had a phone, so you couldn't call anyone. So it wasn't nearly as useful as it is today, now that everyone has one. So if you're going to a platform like MySpace where nobody's there, boring.
Yeah.
And social media interaction forms around people communicating and sharing interests and being able to easily form groups that share those interests. And so this is how Facebook far excelled MySpace. They were able to easily help people connect in this way. So where are they now? The founders had left the site in 2009. They made multiple attempts at rebranding, but all were futile. News Corp sold them to Time Incorporated in 2011 for an undisclosed amount, but rumoured to be around $35 million.
I've got a very confident article here that says 35 million.
And in the same year, they announced they were firing 500 employees, which was about half their staff at the time. Plus,
tiny in comparison, if you think about it.
Yeah.
for a tech company, but
Yes.
understandable.
Plus, they reported a $156 million operating loss for just one quarter in that year.
Ouch.
So, having said all of this, MySpace is actually still around today, but it's unrecognizable. They kind of look like an online magazine, and it's all like about music, but it doesn't really look like it's being managed or maintained that much.
Because from my understanding, Time got bought. They became a company in a portfolio of companies, and when that happens, you're not being looked after as well as you can.
Yep. So that's sort of the MySpace journey. I wonder if we take a break.
Makes me sad, Emily. It reminds me of our childhood. Tom, where are you? See you soon. All right, Emily, we're back.
With that, so let's get into the discussion. So many things, I think, come from being unable to see a clear issue or being arrogant enough to think you're above it. So News Corp, the chief operating officer, said in 2006, if you look at virtually any Web 2.0 application, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Flickr, whether it's PhotoBucket, or any of the next generation web applications, almost all of them are really driven off the back of MySpace. Given that most of their traffic comes from us, if we build adequate, if not superior competitors, I think we ought to be able to match them, if not exceed them. So he was basing the idea on the fact that they were the biggest and the others relied on them meant that they always would be the biggest. And it ignores new competitors or existing competitors like YouTube moving to competitors or becoming competitors. So it'd be interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting to ask the question if whether Facebook or another competitor hadn't sort of come about, which is unlikely because social media was always going to blow up.
Yep.
But if so, whether people would be more patient with those sort of bugs and glitches. Like I said, I spent hours on my MySpace page. And if that's all my friends were, then I think that's where I wanted to be.
So if I'm hearing you right, MySpace saw themselves as a portfolio of these tech companies. And so because you were getting the smorgasbord of options, like you had your ability to share photos, you had your ability to show your music, you also had that great network effect, they'd be fine. There might be one company that's excellent at being a photo portfolio and doesn't have any bugs, premium experience, but doesn't have all these lovely added features that have in that MySpace experience. They were fine. And so MySpace saw that as their key differentiator, which I think is actually incorrect because the key differentiator was shown to be their network effects and the fact that they did have a network and your friends were on there and you would be there if your friends were there, which they lost because the network left and everyone bumped over to other social networks, namely Facebook, because they were doing it and doing it better.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lesson here around being the everyman's tool that maybe is great until it's not great. We'll use a very simple analogy in terms of a multi-tool or a pocket knife, and it's got a knife tool, it's got a screwdriver, etc., etc. Great if you're in a pinch, but it's not the preferred mode of operating, and people are going to travel towards something that is the most premium version of that product, either standalone or the better version of that. So I like the mentality. I don't disagree with components of it, but I actually don't think they were the best element of any of that. And I think you still have to have one core thing they're actually really good at, which I don't think they had. They actually started to lose those core competencies.
Yeah.
And I think it's maybe why a lot of younger people like us were happy to be on it and go through those bugs, because we had the time to be able to put into it. I still remember grilling my history teacher in 2008 because she was talking about how she was on Facebook, and I was like, oh, it's for old people. And the reason it was for old people is because they didn't actually have time to sit there and customize all their profile and make it as good as they had. It was fresh out of the box, which is something as you get older you actually kind of gravitate towards. You go, cool, that's great, that's fresh out of the box. We won't talk about Facebook now, what it's become. Wouldn't call it fresh out of the box.
No.
For MySpace, we had Pixos, which was another layer of customization, which again, people moved away from and saw MySpace because it had a bit more structure. It's just something they lost that element, and they continued to dilute their core value proposition over offering all this smorgasbord of little different products, etc., etc. And as you mentioned, relying on only developing in-house really did them in.
Yeah.
And like Facebook being able to control that third-party market, amazing.
I just think that if you're going to be in the tech industry, you have to understand that it is changing and moving so constantly. You have to have such an ear to the ground around what's happening and what the community wants, how those wants and needs will change over time. And I think that they were more interested in ad revenue than functionality, which comes around from the fact that it was started by marketing and entertainment people and bought by a news and advertising company.
Yeah.
They were all trying to run a tech business, which they've got no business running. So understand that that's not your expertise and make decisions based on that.
Bring in the external talent when you need it.
Yeah.
I still remember, even when I did move on to the Facebook environment, I remember the mobile app being much more easy to use than the MySpace app. I actually don't recall whether MySpace had a mobile app at all. But it's interesting how much I think that maybe that's a giant element in which help their transition is that
I'm
Facebook,
pretty sure MySpace didn't have a mobile app.
and they moved to mobile. Facebook became almost mobile first. They weren't.
You
They
couldn't
very much.
do,
They
like-
doubled down on that mobile experience.
You couldn't do MySpace on there. Like, think about what the profiles and stuff looked like. You couldn't.
How would
It
my
would have been a
song play
nightmare.
automatically?
Yeah.
And I think as well, the user experience was horrendous. Going to other people's profiles was almost hostile because you'd have things like your music track would automatically blare and there'd be some screamo track because you're feeling a bit sad that week because someone didn't respond to your love letter. And it's a horrendous flashing background, and then you scroll down to the top 8 friend and you're not in there. But we were happy to use it at the time because there was nothing better until there was a lesson for all in that. Make sure your product's good and don't ever check user experience out the door.
Yeah.
I think.
Especially if you're relying on users as your success metric, like how many people
Correct.
are looking at.
And a huge volume of users as well. Like there's 100% there's special new software out there that's horrendously designed because 100 people may touch it. But when your whole product is based on lots of users engaging with it constantly, got to be some clear focus on what that actually means, which I do believe Facebook did.
Yes, and the way Facebook has integrated advertising is a lot less offensive in the way that MySpace did, because it became really clear that this was an advertising space and not a space for them to connect. And that balance that MySpace had struck for a while all of a sudden went like that. And this is an audio podcast. People can't see what I'm doing.
Unless you watch on YouTube, but Em's waving her hands around for those playing at home.
But it's like the balance of those scales, the advertising went right up, and so people noticed, and people aren't dumb most of the time.
Yeah. And again, the ads were, at that time in the internet's history, were hostile. Like it was pre or around the time when AdSense and Google AdWords were taking off. And so I remember the ads being quite rude, and like they were audio ads, and so they yell at you and you wouldn't know where they're coming from. Or they'd be bright and flashing. And like to go back to your comments around looking like a porn, they were not good. They were not an experience in which you actually want to be there or encourage you to click. You got to wonder, you'd click to turn it off versus clicking to actually engage with where the ad's taking you. You mentioned the pedophilia concerns and the privacy and security. I find it quite sad when a company has that as one of their things that they're really proud of until they don't. And until they drop the ball. Really got to walk the talk in that space. And I think we've seen so many privacy and security issues across the boards. If you're saying you're a privacy and security focused company or have that best in mind, you really do need to walk the talk and understand what that means. And I think as well, I think we're all learning what the definition of privacy and data security means. It's not just making sure that no one can get access to it. It's making sure that you know where your data is, know who has access to your data, making sure that people in your company who do have access to data, it's necessary for their job versus just having it for the purposes of having it. And so putting in those controls around user information is really important in any company that happens now. Again, they're probably the start of where that was a focus, but it should be a focus in any company that starts off now.
Yeah, 100%. I actually have another question for you. Like there was also a really massive shift where it went from really attractive people to people selling sex on their profiles. And so it became quite a trashy sort of place to be. Instagram has a very similar risk, I would say, associated with that. Not so much Facebook, but Instagram has a massive risk. How do you think they've avoided it not completely going down the garden path? Is it sort of about that the way they monitor the profiles, do you think?
They do have quite strong community guidelines, and I think they uphold those a lot. And there's quite a lot of commentary around whether the nipples of all genders should be shown on Instagram, and we won't get into too much of that. But I do think they do have the ability. They have a higher standard and a higher review process in which and a lot of companies have kind of built this and developed this as they've had to and the needs to, and the amount of content that gets put up on the internet expands exponentially. But I think there's always going to be a fine line in user-generated content around what a platform is willing to accept when it bridges the gap between expressing oneself, also between sexualizing and putting people at risk who shouldn't be at risk in that environment. So I don't think they have avoided it. I think they've just kept on top of it, and I think they're continuing to evolve in that and keep on touch with the zeitgeist. I'm not saying they're doing it brilliant, but I think my platform is not inundated with salacious material. Of course, there's scantily dressed lasses and men
and all genders,
of all genders. But I think they're at a point where it does have the expectation of what the community guidelines are, versus something like Twitter where anything goes, and different community guidelines, I might say.
Yeah, great. That's interesting.
Now I'm real sad.
Why?
But, I don't know. I just feel like I wanted Myspace to succeed.
Yeah, we all learned HTML. It's wild.
We all learned hexy codes and how to put numbers in. Well, listeners, that is the end of our podcast. So we hope that when you build your giant social network, you don't put yourself in everyone's top 8 friends. If you want to learn more for your business, sign up to the mailing list. Emily, how will people hear from you?
They can go to thebigconsultingagency.com or the Big Consulting Agency on Instagram.
They'll hear about news about workshops and stay up to date with all our new episodes. Please don't forget to follow us and rate us on your podcast app of choice. You can find me on Dale Bryce L on all your social networks except MySpace, unfortunately. It wasn't fun, Em. It was sad. It just reminds me how the big ones can fall. Thanks for listening, listeners. See you soon.
Bye.